it's no surprise that it is the way that it is. Getting research done is really expensive. The way that these academics are set up, they have to, publish so much research before they can, get their tenure. They have to be able to lock down all sorts of funding. So when a big company comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm going to provide you with all the funding you need to get all of your research done to get your tenure," and that's the stuff that decides, you keeping your job, you getting a pay raise, you being able to support your family. It's really no surprise that this kind of stuff happens, right? But it is the reason why we have to look at research a little bit differently. It's not as simple as just picking up a study and looking at it anymore, because we have to look at, where the study's coming from, who's funding it, what are the connections. And to your point, the biggest issue with this industry funded research is that it's not research that is just being done and then the data is being published. A lot of times, the people who are conducting the studies are just conducting it. They're packaging the research and sending it to these companies where they get to manipulate it however they please before it actually gets published out into the general populations.
Well, welcome, Chris Irvin. We've got a special guest today. Thank you very much for doing this. I was just kind of perusing through my social media, and I saw an interesting post from you this morning, and I'll get into that. But before we do that, would you mind sharing with the folks here a little bit about you, who you are? Where are you located, by the way, Chris?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on today. But yeah, I'm located in St. Petersburg, Florida. So the Tampa Bay area, it's the small city in the Tampa Bay area. Everybody knows Tampa and Clearwater. Not as many people know the St. Pete.
I was in St. Pete in October, so pretty area, pretty nice. Yeah, when I went.
Nice.
I had dinner at Ruth's Chris downtown St. Pete. Really nice, nice meal out there. So
Nice. That's awesome. It's a great area. I moved back here. I was out in Austin for about 2 years before this, and definitely missing the barbecue since moving back. That's probably been the hardest part.
yeah, I went to college at University of Texas, so I
Oh,
definitely can
.
empathize with that. The sort of the Central Texas barbecue is second to none.
It is. I
Just
always
my
tell
opinion.
everybody now, like I have such a hard, like I almost wish I didn't live out there, because now no barbecue tastes the same. So it was great while I lived out there, but now I just can't get it right here.
Well, you just got to get a smoker and do it yourself, man. I mean,
True.
that's the deal out there. You definitely got the weather to do it out there. Well, so
That's right.
maybe a little hot. Well, anyway, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's going on? Where did the Ketologist come from? Where did all that sort of stuff start?
Yeah. So after I got done with my undergrad, I was studying exercise science and nutrition in my undergrad, and kind of took a year off and was getting into. Thought I was getting more into sports performance. Wanted to go like the strength and conditioning route, and then got kind of bitten by the nutrition bug, and realized that I did not learn the appropriate things in my undergrad as it relates to nutrition. So I went back to grad school for a master's in nutrition science, and I was introduced to the keto diet there. The university that I went to was doing some research. It was actually my first class. We took a sports medicine class, and we went over all of the research related to the ketogenic diet and endurance performance, which I had never seen before. And I was like, "Hey, this is great. I'm super interested in this. Would love to try it." I was actually, after that first class, I went out and tried the diet myself, and this would have been back in 2015. So made a lot of mistakes. Was definitely doing the throw butter on everything. Not really looking at quality of the food, not really prioritizing, nutrient dense meats, just kind of eating high fat foods. And so, made a lot of mistakes, but spent the next couple of years really studying the diet. In grad school, I actually did research in a lab looking at the ketogenic diet for human performance. So we were doing keto with strength and conditioning athletes like basketball players and lacrosse players and baseball players. And after doing that for a little while, I pivoted and started getting more into the therapeutic side of things, where I went to USF, where Dr. Dom and Angela Poff and all those great folks are at. And was fortunate enough to do an internship in their lab, and got to study keto in animal models, which I always tell people that animal models are great, but the difference between animal models versus human models is that animals bite you and humans don't. So I did not get out of there without any bites. I had a few scars from that internship, but really during that internship, I kind of developed a passion for the therapeutic side of keto, and I started realizing that there was all this incredible research that was just tucked away in these journals that nobody had access to, or if you had access to it, you wouldn't be able to understand it anyway. So the ketologist kind of came from this desire to wanting to take that information and make it more just accessible and applicable to the general population. So the Ketologist has always been about just sharing, actionable information and research with people in a kind of a dumbed down way that is a little bit easy. You don't have to have a PhD to get it. So that's how the Ketologist came to be. And over the last couple of years, I've spent some time kind of now getting into more of the marketing side of things. Been trying to learn a little bit about how to market some of these health changes that are becoming popular. I worked for Perfect Keto for a couple of years, I was their education manager, so I was helping with internal employee education and then also external customer education, and then did that for about 3-4 years. And then now I currently work for BioCoach, which is a health platform, medical device and health tech platform that is focusing on diabetes. So yeah, that's kind of my short story.
Well, it's fascinating, and a number of avenues we can go down. I think like I said, there's a diet war that's going on, and the sort of the metric everybody balls, and you can lose weight anyway. It's all calories in, calories out, and
Hmm.
it's like that's fine. It's interesting, but what really excites me about what I do, like I said, I got a little message from a guy, schizophrenia. I mean, his schizophrenia is getting better on diet. And he's
Wow.
doing it through a carnivore keto style of diet, and that to me is really where the magic is. And you mentioned at the very beginning, when you just focus on macronutrients and you're not focusing on diet quality, it's a big difference. I mean, it's a huge
Mhm.
difference. And like you said, you can throw butter on everything, or you can be swigging Diet Coke and Crisco oil and call it a ketogenic diet, but is it really helping you? Probably not. And
Mhm.
so, but one of the let me just discuss this because I think this is important to understand this. We like to reference the science, but sometimes the science we have to be careful because as you mentioned in your post this morning, I think you mentioned that Coca-Cola spent something like I don't know half a trillion, or I don't know what the number, $500 million on research between 2010 and 2015. Maybe the number's off on that to sort of promote energy balance model. It's more about exercise and less about calories, and Coca-Cola pays for this, and there's a lot of money going there. A lot of researchers will quote those studies to sort of justify this, this sort of you just got to exercise, and you can eat whatever you want thing. But let's talk a little bit about the reliability of research. Pran Yoganathan, who's another person that I've kind of associated with, pointed out that something like all the research that's been done by corporations, it's been funded by corporations, it's proprietary. So even the peer
Mhm.
reviewers don't even get to look at the raw data. So all they get is the conclusions that the researchers make. It's hard to trust that stuff, man. I mean, I got to tell
Yeah.
you, it's like, and the former editor in chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, I think her name is Maria Engel. She quit. She said, I cannot ethically continue to participate in this sort of corporate pharmaceutical disaster of research. It's just advertising for them, basically. It's not true science. So, anyway, with that
Yeah.
in mind, some of the science is probably still valid.
Right.
let's
Right.
let's uh, let's let's talk a little bit about because I do find the performance side fascinating, the athlete in me, and obviously I've been doing this stuff for God, I've been training for 40 some years and doing well on a very low carb regimen myself. Let's talk about some of the therapeutic stuff because that's where I think most of the people here in this audience are probably interested in. There are a lot of people that have different diseases and are using low carb ketogenic carnivore diets with varying levels of success. Sometimes wildly successful. So where are we at on therapy?
Yeah, for sure. And I think to just speak a quick note on the Coke stuff, it's one of those things where coming from a research background and kind of having some insights into the way academics work, it's no surprise that it is the way that it is. Getting research done is really expensive. The way that these academics are set up, they have to publish so much research before they can get their tenure. They have to be able to lock down all sorts of funding. So when a big company comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm going to provide you with all the funding you need to get all of your research done to get your tenure," and that's the stuff that decides, you keeping your job, you getting a pay raise, you being able to support your family. It's really no surprise that this kind of stuff happens, right? But it is the reason why we have to look at research a little bit differently. It's not as simple as just picking up a study and looking at it anymore, because we have to look at where the study's coming from, who's funding it, what are the connections, and to your point, the biggest issue with this industry funded research is that it's not It's not research that is just being done and then the data is being published. A lot of times, the people who are conducting the studies are just conducting it. They're packaging the research and sending it to these companies where they get to manipulate it however they please before it actually gets published out into the general population. So yeah, when it comes to and this is really relates to the therapeutic side of things too, because with Coke we're talking about big food, but we also see this on the big pharma side of things, right? Big pharma does not want you to think that there are natural remedies that you could use to heal your diseases, right? It wouldn't be great for them if you could heal your schizophrenia without having to have some sort of psychiatric medication. Wouldn't be great if you could cure diabetes without going on insulin and metformin. This is kind of something that, so even when we look at this therapeutic research, we have to look at it through this lens. And I think a good way to approach this is, if we look at a lot of disease, we know today that 88%, I think that one of the most recent studies is like somewhere around 88% of the population is metabolically unhealthy, right? So I kind of deem this as like insulin resistance, pre-diabetic. And so we know that one of the best ways to target metabolic health and pre-diabetes and insulin resistance is through improving our blood sugar levels. So being that we know that, we kind of have a base understanding of human physiology, and we know that we've seen plenty of case studies and plenty of research that supports this. Anytime we see a study that kind of goes against this, we should be a bit skeptical, right? Like if we see a study that shows that a low carb diet shows no benefit for somebody with type 2 diabetes, we should say, hey, let's maybe take a little deeper dive on this study and see who's funding this study. What was the like, and maybe there are different variables in a study that can change the results, but we have to pay attention to those things. And I think a lot of times when people just go, they cherry pick research that agrees with what kind of whatever their stance is on something, they tend to pick research that may not be the most quality research. So but as it relates to the therapeutic side, I think the most exciting thing over the last few years is seeing all the different applications of the ketogenic diet. Or when I say ketogenic diet, I'm not much of for the traditional approach to keto. I kind of look at keto as this category of low carb diets, right? It's anything that would induce a state of ketosis, whether permanently or temporarily, right? So a low carb diet, intermittent fasting, carnivore, all of these different approaches. What's been really exciting is to just see all these different therapeutic applications, right? I mean, we knew that ketosis was beneficial for epilepsy. We've known that for over 100 years, and that was awesome. And then we saw, hey, weight loss. This is great. We're seeing people that are losing incredible amounts of weight, 75, 100, 150 pounds. And then all of a sudden it's diabetes. Holy cow, diabetes and metabolic syndrome. We're seeing that a low carb approach can be helpful here. And then you start getting into some of the neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And of course we have less research in those areas, but we're starting to see some really exciting, promising results there. And then you touched on the schizophrenia, the mental health disorders, where we're seeing things like for schizophrenia, OCD, autism, just all kinds of different brain related disorders. So that's the thing that gets me excited, is I think we're now starting to see that a lot of our and something that somebody would ask that's looking at from the outside would say, well, what is it that's so special about keto or a low carb diet or carnivore? And I do think carnivore is special in its own sense, but what are the things that make these little diets be able to kind of spread their impact across all these different conditions? And really the answer is that all of these different conditions are rooted in the same causes, right? It's insulin resistance, it's inflammation, and then some of the ancillary problems like energy deficits and poor gut health and all of that. So when you look at the way that these low carb diets target all of these same pathways that are present in our most common chronic diseases, it becomes pretty obvious that we should see this. So that's been really exciting for me over the last few years to see. What I remember, just the first time I heard about keto, I was at a conference in Tampa. This would have been back in 2015, and Dr. D'Agostino and Dr. Volek were speaking, and they were talking about keto. I had no idea what keto was, and I heard their research, and I was like, cool, this sounds great for somebody who's looking to lose weight or for somebody that's an endurance performer. But there can't be any application outside of that. And now 6-7 years later, it's like, holy cow, this is something that has completely taken the world by storm, and I think that's exciting.
One of the, and this is an interesting thing because you talk about the diet and all the commonalities of diet. And some of the things I see, what are we removing? Well, we're removing all this processed garbage in most of the diets. Now, there are ketogenic diets that obviously the diet industry, the food industry sticks a keto label on some junk food and calls it
Yeah.
keto cookie, keto ice cream, keto crap, and that's obviously a problem. But in general, Do you find that it's, it's removal of the garbage, which is common to all these diets, and that is largely what we're seeing with some of the benefits, or is it dose dependent upon how many ketones you're producing? Because that's some people get, really concerned about, am I in ketosis? Is my glucose ketone index X, Y, or Z? So is there a true dose dependent nature of what we're seeing, or is it just the diet in general that is helping, you think?
Totally. That's a great question, and it's kind of a lot of different things, right? I think at baseline, the best thing that's happening with a keto low carb diet is that you are removing things, right? Even in the worst ketogenic diet, like the dirty, call it dirty keto, whatever you want, the one where you're eating the most processed keto foods, you're at least removing sugar, right? In most cases, I used to be able to say that. Nowadays, there actually are some companies that are still have like sugar as like the third ingredient, and they're labeling it keto. But for the most part, you are removing sugar. And if we look at insulin resistance, that is at least one of the factors. And I think seed oils is another one. We can get into that in a second. But and there is a chicken or the egg with that conversation. But regardless, if 88% of our population is metabolically damaged, if 1 in 3 adults in the US are pre-diabetic, those people can't metabolize carbohydrates very well. They can't metabolize sugar very well. So when we remove it, we're going to see some benefit, right? And I think the degree to which you see the benefit is going to be based on other factors in the diet, right? So, if you are also removing seed oils, which is becoming harder with the more, at least I don't know what the stat is, but if I had to guess, over 50%, probably higher, of keto labeled foods that you see at the grocery store have seed oils in them, right? So we know that that's a big driver of inflammation, insulin resistance in and of itself. So if you're also cutting those foods out, then hey, you're going to see even more benefit. If you are maybe doing some sort of, not that time restricted feeding is necessary, but having gaps in between your meals where you allow your body to digest all of the food so that you can have a little bit healthier of a digestive system, you're going to see even more benefits there. If you're replacing the food, the big thing is that keto, we get hung up on just cutting out foods, right? It's all about what we take away, but what's really important is what we replace it with. So if your keto diet is including nutrient dense red meat, organ meats, some of the, I'm kind of up in the air on fruits and vegetables, but certain fruits I think that are lower glycemic that have some micronutrients in them. If you're including those things in there, getting enough protein, getting healthy fats, then you're going to see even more benefit. I think on the ketone side of things, it's a great question. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, when keto was really popular, I think everybody was really hung up on this concept of like, higher ketone levels, and we should be in ketosis all the time. And I think more people have come around to the notion that that's not necessarily true. Having deeper levels of ketones is not going to mean that you're losing more weight. It may give you more energy. You may notice a little bit more of a cognitive boost from it. But I think that you can kind of take strategies to have that happen strategically, right? Like you don't necessarily have to be 2.0 millimolars all the time to benefit from keto. You can be sitting around zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.5, and as long as your blood sugar is in check, you can see benefits. And really, I think that's the marker that we should be paying more attention to, rather than being so hung up in ketones and ketosis. I think that paying attention to our blood sugar and keeping that in check is going to be kind of the most important thing for moving the needle. But of course, there are some therapeutic instances where ketones are important. They do play a role in some of the more brain related, potential benefits of keto. So epilepsy, we know they're going to be important for, Alzheimer's if we think there's some benefit there, and then potentially some of these psychiatric disorders just because of the way that ketones, interact with the brain. So I don't think it's something that we need to necessarily chase these higher ketones all the time. I think most of the benefit you're going to get is from taking this whole food, low carb approach. And I think if you do that, you can kind of not have to worry about the ketones because you're going to be in some state of ketosis. And really, if you're not, you're going to notice it, right? Like the whole thing with ketones is that they're providing you an additional source of energy. So if you feel like you're really dragging, then you probably aren't in any state of ketosis. And that may be reason for you to kind of take a look at your diet, see if maybe some carbs have crept in or whatever. But kind of a long-winded way to answer your question that, yeah, I think it's the removal. It's kind of the removal of toxic foods that's providing the bulk of the benefit when it comes to keto.
Let me, you sells a blood glucose monitor, well, it's a hemoglobin A1C device, and so you can measure, your chronic glucose exposure. And you mentioned the importance of having well managed blood glucose. And some of the people will say, like myself, will say, "Hey, when I exercise, my blood glucose goes up. Is that a bad thing?" I tend to think it shouldn't be because I'm exercising. Exercise generally thought is a good thing, just like inflammation goes up when I exercise. context dependent. But are you seeing, and this was a discussion I remember about, it was really about 5 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, people were talking about this because some people were saying, hey, sometimes we see an elevated hemoglobin A1C, and it doesn't make sense because our readings are low. Or, if we compare it to an on-site, an on the in the moment blood glucose monitor, they're not lining up. And some people say, well, I've gone on a ketogenic diet, a carnivore diet, and my blood glucose has actually gone up, even though I've seen improved glycemic variability. Is there much still people talking about red cell life? Because that was one of the thoughts is, if your red blood cells are living longer than the prescribed, 120 days or 90 days or whatever it's supposed to be, then you're going to have more your hemoglobin is gonna be higher. You guys seen? What is your area of research? Are you still doing active research, Chris, or can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can definitely. So I'm doing more of on the reading the research that's coming out there. I'm not working in a lab setting anymore, but I am fairly up to date on the research that's coming out. And I do think that there's something to the red blood cell life, and I do think that could be a reason why we're seeing a little bit of like difference between what we're seeing from people's like fasted blood sugar versus like an A1C. But one of the things I'm always before I jump to a more complex explanation of a problem, I always kind of want to look at a more simple explanation. I think generally speaking, most people are testing their blood sugar at the wrong time of the day. I think a lot of people are getting in the habit of testing first thing in the morning, where maybe they're subjecting themselves to the dawn effect. Which is we know is your blood sugar spiking as your body is producing cortisol naturally, a part of your circadian rhythms. So that could be a reason why you're seeing that spike. You could see higher blood sugar after even a keto friendly meal because we know that even if you were to eat the most keto friendly meal, you may still see a moderate increase in your blood glucose levels. You talk about during exercise or after exercise, we may see higher blood sugar levels. So and that kind of highlights another reason why people on keto may have generally speaking may still have higher blood glucose levels is because cortisol is the hormone that's important here, right? So when you exercise, that's one of the big reasons why your body's kind of triggering this as an opportunity where you need to be physically present, you need to be physically engaged. So cortisol is a hormone that will spike, which will help release stored glycogen in the body. It'll start shuttling glucose out so you can use it for energy, and this is generally a good thing. Our ancestors living on the savannah, it would have been, they see a lion and they need to run from it. So cortisol spikes and they have this parasympathetic response, and it's a great thing. But a lot of us today are living in this environment all of the time, even when we don't know it or feel it. We're stressed on the way to work. We're stressed about our finances. We have our phones at all times. We're using our phones before bed, which is spiking our cortisol levels. So I kind of think that may be a reason why we're seeing it. I think there could be something to this red blood cell life, and I'm not totally ready to discredit that, but for most people, I would say it may be something else that's causing you to have this either the single time point of a higher blood sugar reading or just kind of chronically not seeing your blood sugar levels get in check despite eating a low carb diet.
Yeah, we just interviewed the author of a paper, and I'm blanking on his name right now. Apologize, but he was from the UK and he did a study looking at low carb diets, high protein low carb diets. You may have saw in the paper. And the headline basically said that meat causes men to be sterile, which is just ridiculous. Because it had an impact on testosterone. But one of the things he looked at was cortisol levels, and he found that outside of a 3 week effect, the fasting cortisol levels were pretty much unaffected. In the initial transition period, we saw elevations in cortisol, but I believe after exercise, you continue to see an increase in cortisol, uh, you know, in a low carb state, just probably because we need those kind of regulatory mechanisms to drive glycogenolysis, so you can access the blood sugar. I think
Hmm.
so. I don't know if there's some impact on it. Again, I think a lot of this stuff is still very much unknown. I know back on the red blood cell life, I know fructosamine will often sort that out. Fructosamine is an alternate way to check, chronic glucose levels over, I think it's about a 3 week period, I think, something like that. Let me ask
Yeah.
you about performance because, I heard it all the time. You're not going to be able to do jujitsu. You're not going to be able to do this. And I just do. I'm like, yeah, yeah, sure. And I end up doing it. And, despite not having any significant carbohydrate in my diet, I'm able to perform even in highly glycolytic exercises like setting world records in rowing and doing jujitsu and weightlifting and all these things.
Hmm.
Still be able to do it. What does the research show? I know some of like the short term research, like Louise Burke and others, will say that low carb diets are awful for performance. They're not awful, but
Yeah.
substandard performance compared to carbs. Are we seeing equivalents in some areas, or is it like a lot of the critics will say, "Hey, man, you just need to test people for longer. You need to do a 3 week, 3 month, 6 month study and see." But are we seeing any of that bearing out now? Those assumptions.
Yeah, we're starting to see some improvements in it. I remember when I first got into the space, it was like, people would say, keto is good for endurance, but that's it. There's no other utility for it. But you started looking at the studies, and it was kind of obvious that like these research studies were either set up to find what they found, or they just weren't set up properly to really bring out all the benefits of a keto diet. And like one of them that you said is not allowing enough time. I know like a bunch of the studies, a few years ago that people would use would be like 5 day studies where they would like put somebody on a keto diet for like 3 days, and then they would test their performance measures. And anybody who's done a low carb diet knows very well that like that's that first part, especially when you're new to it, is when you're least likely to even be motivated to go to the gym and work out, let alone like set good numbers, right? So that was a big issue. But then we also, there was a lot of not adjusting the diet for the goal, right? So you would see these studies where they were incredibly low protein. One of the studies I know that was published a couple of years ago was looking at keto diet in men and women who were resistance training, and in the men particularly, because they were lifting 3 or 4 times a week. It was like a 12-week study. They lost muscle mass, and then so people would take the study and say, "Oh, well, keto is bad for muscle mass, so it can't be good for strength sports." And then you would look at the study and be like, "Well, they were eating 20% protein, right? Like you didn't adjust." The calories or the macronutrients to accommodate what the goals were. So there's not a whole lot of study. And a lot of this is because in research, you kind of have to classify, like there's different classifications, right? Like low carb is considered less than 120 grams. Keto, for some reason, is considered, this certain macronutrient ratio or fat to protein ratio. So a lot of these times they're trying to use these protocols that are used for therapeutics like epilepsy or diabetes, any of these other conditions, and they're not applying it directly for sports performance. So I mean, there are a handful of studies out there I think that have done a better job, but I think the better place to look is just anecdotally and into like into the community for who's seeing positive results, right? I mean, for me personally, I played college basketball. I was a high carb athlete when I was playing college basketball. I still play basketball today, and I feel way better than I ever did. I'm 10 years older than I was when I was an undergrad, and I have less joint inflammation. I'm faster. I have a better vertical than I had when I was in college. Like all of these things have improved, right? So obviously that's anecdotally, but start talking to other people. Like, we talk to people who are set like yourself, who are setting crazy numbers, right? We see like folks like Zach Bitter who have like the record for the ultra marathon running. We see folks like the Bell brothers who are who have followed low carb diets and are incredibly strong, and they're doing power conditioning and stuff like that. So I just I think that we're not looking at the right areas to see the impact that keto can have on these people. But the other thing I'm always hesitant to is like a lot of the research, we're not looking at general population, right? So if you're talking about an elite athlete, right, like you're talking about LeBron James, you're talking about, so I'm more of a basketball guy, so I'll probably just rattle off basketball guys, but you're talking these elite athletes, their bodies are incredibly insulin sensitive, most of them. They're well primed. They have a combination of good genetics plus good work ethic, and the fact that they're working out all the time. They are primed to be able to like take carbs in and utilize them, right? So for them, carbs can definitely provide an ergogenic aid, and we would expect a boost in performance. But for the general population, one, if you're insulin resistant, those carbs aren't going to provide much benefit. And actually, for most people, they're going to make you more sluggish. They're going to, maybe make you a little bit more bloated. So if you're doing them like pre-workout, you're not going to see a boost in performance. So for the general population, which I include myself in that, when we take carbohydrates out and we just eat a clean diet, we eat more protein rich foods, we see tremendous improvements. I think Rachel Gregory was a gal who did a great study back in 2016 where she kind of did this. It was like a 6 week study, I think, where she took just regular people and put them on, they were CrossFitters, and she put them on a keto diet, and she said, go do CrossFit, and all of their numbers got better because these were people who were previously eating horribly, and now they're eating a lot better. So I think you kind of can simplify it down to that, right? If you are not metabolically healthy, then carbs aren't going to be providing you a benefit. And we know that through improving your metabolism, you're going to be, burning energy better. So that's going to be, more fuel for better performance. So I think it's kind of logically we can say that this is better. But when we look at the research, unfortunately, we're missing a lot of we're missing the boat there. And another reason why I think this is because a lot of the researchers who are doing exercise, kind of the top guns that are doing exercise physiology and exercise science research are pretty against low carb diets. Like I saw this when I was in academics. Like we would go to the National Strength and Conditioning conference and we'd be presenting our research and people would stop by and they would just grill us. Like they really wanted to take us down. Like there had to have been a reason why we saw, sports performance improvements on a keto diet. So I think some of it's dogma, right? And these folks are the ones that are receiving the funding for studies. They're the ones that are conducting most of the research. So most of what you see published is going to have at least some sort of bias to it.
Uh, yeah, certainly there's a corporate interest in a lot of this stuff, which is unfortunate. I don't know. There's a way around that. I mean, stuff that
Yeah.
some of these studies are very expensive. As one of the criticisms for people saying, "Well, I can't do a 6 month study. It's just cost you too much damn money." And some true. I mean, as I'm trying to fund studies, we're seeing how much they cost, and they're not cheap at all. And if you don't have
No.
a pharmaceutical company backing you, it's hard to get these studies done. Particularly to the rigor that you'd like to.
Hmm.
Um, you'd mentioned protein. This is something that obviously I'm a pretty big pro protein guy. There's a lot of concern around protein in various circles, longevity circles. Certainly, the plant based folks are. I wouldn't call them anti protein, but they feel that we eat too much protein. And yet there's other people that feel we eat far too little protein. I'm in that camp. What are your thoughts around protein with regard to is it? I mean, with regard to athletic performance, it seems like it's a pretty no-brainer. Protein is definitely a benefit, particularly if you're concerned with lean mass. But do you have any concerns like guys like Walter Longo or David Sinclair or some of these sort of longevity gurus who I'm older than all those guys, by the way, which makes me laugh. I'm like, yeah, I'm old. I'm already outlived all you guys. But um, any concerns about that? We're stimulating mTOR by providing protein, and therefore we're going to get cancer and die.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that in terms of the longevity research, there's it's an interesting thing, right? Because you look at some of this research and you look at like the overstimulation of mTOR pathways, and you start seeing that maybe there's some reason to be concerned about longevity. But I think a couple things to point out is a lot of this research is not whole body, whole being research. A lot of this is cellular research, right? And that doesn't really check out to know. We don't know how this really affect, like we haven't looked at somebody over the course of their whole life and measured their protein intake, right? Any studies that are longer like that are epidemiological studies that have plenty of flaws with them. So I don't really think that there's anything in research that we can say definitively is a reason not to consume protein. And I think from a longevity standpoint, a bigger concern is having sarcopenia, low muscle mass, right? I mean, we know that this is a reason why as we get older, like losing muscle mass is a reason why we age. It makes us more likely to have injuries. It makes us more susceptible to even metabolic damage, right? Like muscle is kind of just a dump for glucose and for energy burning. So when we don't have a lot of muscle mass, we don't metabolize nutrients very well. So from my standpoint, when I look at it from a longevity view, having a lower protein intake and less muscle mass seems far more damaging than having too much. Now, I'm sure that there's a threshold in there. I'm sure that we can go completely overboard chronically, but I think that would be something that would be really hard for us to achieve. I don't think the gram per pound of lean body mass or even a gram per pound. I've heard that recommendation too. I don't think you're even getting close to a lethal amount of protein at that point. And when you look at a lot of the reasons why people are not healthy today, I think low protein is a big reason why for two reasons. I mean, one, just the fact that protein is important. A lot of times we just associate protein with muscle building, and then that's where you'll get some of these like, you only need like 20 to 25 grams in a sitting because that can stimulate protein synthesis. But like there's a bunch of, everything in our body requires protein. Amino acids are involved in every single, process in our body. They're a huge part of our biochemistry. So we're not going to function optimally when we don't have enough protein. And that's outside of just the fact that we may not have, more muscle mass. We may, not recover as well from exercise or just general daily activities. So that's one side of the protein thing. But then on the other side of it, we also have to consider the micronutrients. I mean, protein sources, we're talking real protein sources that come from animals. These are our most nutrient dense form of foods. And not only the most nutrient dense, but the most bioavailable. I know everybody kind of kicks that word around, but meat, the way that meat is kind of put together, it really agrees with our biology. Our digestive systems are able to digest meat, pull nutrients out at a much higher rate. If you look at there's some really interesting studies where you compare, meat versus plants for different vitamin uptake. And I know one, I think for like vitamin A, it's like, you can, it's like 5% bioavailable in a lot of plants, and it's like 90% bioavailable in meat, right? So if you're somebody who's not, if you're eating a lot of plants and you're not getting enough, protein from an animal source, you're also going to be micronutrient deficient, which is, you talk about that's going to be aging, right? So I have way more concern. If somebody were to ask me, like, do you want to, either overconsume, like you have to place a bet now. You can either overconsume or underconsume protein, and then let's see what happens, in terms of how long you're going to live. I'm definitely putting all of my money on over consuming the protein because I just don't see it being a concern.
Yeah, I interviewed a fellow by the name of David Barr from, I want to say he's from UC Davis. Interesting guy. And we talked about this a few years ago, and he basically pointed out that, there are studies showing that calorie and protein restriction in certain animals leads to improved longevity. Um, However, they end up fairly sarcopenic, even though they may be longer lived. Their function is kind of compromised, and you can compare that to a group that is eating more protein but exercising at the same time. They basically both achieve a longevity benefit, but the ones that are exercising are much more functional. So I think you can look at it. You can kind of limp into old age and be frail, maybe live long, or you could, conversely eat enough protein, exercise, and have a much better, higher quality of life. And that's obviously the path I would prefer to go down. And so I think that's, and then the nuance about mTOR is expressed in all kinds of tissues, and you might want it expressed in your muscle and your brain and other things, whereas maybe not having it in your adipose tissue being expressed at certain times. It depends on what you do. So it's more like everything. It's more nuanced and more subtle than there's no sort of black and white stuff in human physiology. And we, even despite the fact we want to be reductionists and make it that way, it rarely comes
Totally.
out that way.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a great point that you just pointed out about like the quality of life and the being able to do more things, right? I mean, would you rather live to, like, even if we saw that like protein, was an issue, right? Would it be better to live to 100 and be frail, or live to 80 and be able to exercise and do the things that you want every day of your life? And I think that even if that was the case, which I don't think it is, I think it would still be, that would be a better way to go. Like you said, I would much rather choose being functional, being able to walk. You see so many people, they get into their 80s, and I know, like, I have family members, you get older, they can't even walk by themselves. And that just, that's not a fun way to be, right? So, if I would, if calorie restriction is the answer, and that actually is an interesting topic. I think that when it comes to calorie restriction, what a lot of people look at this cut and dry, they say, okay, if research shows that calorie restriction has some potential anti-aging benefits, then we should always be calorie restricted. And I think that's a wrong way to look at it. I think that what the body wants is to be calorie restricted occasionally, right? We need to, I think, to go through periods where we don't eat as many calories, right? Like, that's where I think fasting can be beneficial. That's something that we know has kind of been built into our gene. Like, evolutionarily speaking, that would have happened, right? Like, we would have gone through periods of time where we didn't have as much calories. And of course, that wasn't by choice for them. But I think there was some potential benefit to that. We do know through calorie restriction, we can activate things like autophagy, which can be great for killing cancer cells and kind of catching chronic disease before it gets out of control. But that doesn't mean that we should always be eating 1,200 calories, and we should never be in a caloric surplus. I definitely think it's something that we want to cycle through.
yeah, I mean, two comments. Most of the 100-year-olds that I've ever met have been rolled in on a stretcher wearing diapers, and they've been little old ladies with broken hips that are completely demented. I mean,
Yeah,
literally, that was probably 90% of the people I met that were very, very old, and certainly I wouldn't want to be in that situation. But
yeah.
interestingly, I've seen some, kind of reviews of this caloric restriction and longevity hypothesis, and what we see, I think, when we get to mammals, I mean, there's studies on very, very, lower organisms, fruit flies, worms and things like that,
Worms,
which
yeah.
I don't think you can really, fungi. I don't think you can really use that data very much
Hmm.
to extrapolate to humans. But what they see is in mammals and in primates, typically, when there is a longevity benefit, it's usually when you go from a state of over consuming calories or obesity to non-obesity. And so it's not that calorie restriction is a benefit, it's just obesity or overeating is a big detriment to longevity. And I think I've
Hmm.
seen some studies looking at, being morbidly obese or significantly overweight. It's going to shorten your life, something like 14 years. And so obviously that's a pretty huge, you know, longevity, negative. And so when you're not in that
Hmm.
situation, that's when calorie reduction seems to help. But if you're at a normal weight and a lean weight, then it's probably unlikely to benefit you.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, I think it's kind of like the protein thing, right? Would it be better for you to, you know, consume not enough protein or too much protein? It's the same thing. Like, would it be better for you to be obese or calorie restricted? Right. Like in that case, the calorie restriction is going to be superior because it's not obesity. It's better than the worst thing, right?
Yeah. So let me ask you. I know you spent time with Dom. And I interviewed Dom recently. And he has obviously been doing a lot of work around ketones, external, exogenous ketones, and so on and so
Mhm.
forth. Where are you? Okay, this is the one thing I know. You said BioCoach is associated with diabetes, which I think is great. Something like Verta Health is out there doing it. We're doing something similar, although we feel that the indications are far more above diabetes. I mean, we're seeing, like I
Mhm.
said, mental health and arthritis and skin issues and autoimmune issues all being affected by diet. Where is the research going with keto right now? Are people starting to look at some of these other conditions? I know, like Chris Palmer at Harvard is looking at schizophrenia and some of the other
Mhm.
psychiatric conditions. Are you guys, or are you aware of? Is Dom looking at some of these other things?
Yeah, it's a great question, and unfortunately, there's not enough going on, right? Like, there's a few fringe scientists, like you just mentioned, Dr. Palmer, who are doing their best to get research out there. But as we kind of, coming full circle back to the topic that we talked about at the beginning, research is really expensive, and it's very difficult to come up with funding that doesn't come from a source that has something to gain, right? And there's not a whole lot to be gaining from eating a whole food diet or intermittent fasting or anything like that. You hear people talk about this all the time. This isn't a new thing, but there's not enough, like, for us to really progress this research. We need to have the gold standard, the randomized controlled clinical trials where we have large populations that are going through, and we're looking at very specific things, and it's very difficult for us to get that at this point. It's like you said, how expensive it is. There's the keto companies out there that may have some incentive to do this, can't afford to fund these studies either, right? They're just playing a different ball game when you're trying to compare to like a General Mills or a Coca-Cola. So there's not enough research going on right now. A lot of it is case studies. A lot of it is like these smaller things. I think stuff like what Verta Health is doing, and things like we're doing at BioCoach, I think is a better way to get this stuff out there. I mean, you look at Verta Health; they have their own research that they're publishing. They're publishing some awesome stuff with their own, like with their own patients that are actually going through it. And to me, that's far more valuable than like a small case study that we can get published. This is like real life application, because that's another thing that we miss in research sometimes too, is like, this is what happened in a laboratory setting, but what happens out there in the real world? So not like I said, not enough research is happening right now. There is some really exciting research on the exogenous ketone front that you just mentioned. HVMN is actually a company who, they're a company that has a contract has a DoD contract. The Navy SEAL Spec Ops use their product for, I think, oxygen toxicity and training at high altitudes. And I know they're trying to do some more research looking at other applications of it, like traumatic brain injury and stuff like that. And we are seeing some more research in that area too. I think over the last 5-6 years, there's been a handful of studies, mostly animal studies, that are looking at ketones and traumatic brain injury. So I think that that's exciting stuff. But still, for us to take the jump from there to a randomized, controlled trial, it's just, I don't know how quickly we're going to get there. So and to be honest, that's a big reason why I pulled out of the research and started trying to learn marketing and getting involved in companies a little bit more, because that's, I feel like, a better way to move a needle. What you guys are doing, same thing. Like, that's how you really move a needle. That's how you help people. You can't always wait for the research to catch up. I mean, at the end of the day, you're looking at a lot of conditions where it's not like the current remedies are successful or even bearable, right? I mean, you look at you talk about Dr. Palmer's research. The side effects that come from the medications that these folks have to take are brutal. Same thing for diabetes, same thing for cancer. So it's not like we're trying to reinvent the wheel for something that's working, right? I mean, I forget the exact numbers, but the number of people who have 2, 3, 4 chronic diseases today compared to 40, 50 years ago is just like increased tenfold. It's crazy. So we can't necessarily wait for that research to come along and tell us what to do. I think it's better to get out there. You can make your money go a lot further in the industry by building a company that can have a big impact than what you can do by going into research. But always say that with caution. Like, we do need to have more research, and I think if there's anybody listening to this podcast that has like millions of dollars sitting aside that they want to do something good with, go to the Metabolic Health Summit this week out in California and find a doctor who has a cause that you're interested in, and go try to help fund their research, because that's what they need if they're going to be able to kind of compete with big pharma and big food.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, because there is even if you do the study, does it get any kind of recognition? Because,
Right.
it's interesting because you can look into the literature and find studies that sort of are in direct contrast to what we're kind of being told in general. And it's
Hmm.
like, why weren't these, why am I not aware of the study in the general conscious? I can't tell you how many times I have to continue to, sort of dispel I call them misinformation or whatever you want. We're in this age of misinformation and
Yeah.
disinformation and all this sort of craziness. But because the narrative has been pushed and driven, and it's been funded for so many decades now that it just becomes beef, without any sort of further critical thinking around those things. So even
Yeah.
if you get the study done, it's a matter of getting it marketed and made aware of that. And that's like you mentioned, doing what you're doing and what we're doing is leveraging some of the social media. Is what we have, because this is what we have. We're not going to CBS News is not going to go and do an expose on the benefits of carnivore diet anytime soon. I'm not counting on that. So
Right. And that's
you know,
so true. I mean, it's like we can't really expect that either. Like, to read a research study, I mean, that does take like formal training to be able to do it. So what folks have to do nowadays is that they have to turn to social media or a media outlet to tell them, what a study says. But the problem is that very rarely do you look at a study headline and go look at the study, and is it the same thing that's, going on? Like, it's always a crazy extrapolation that has some sort of bias to it, that, these media outlets or social media influencers have an agenda that they're trying to push. Or sometimes it's just a straight up telephone game. That's another thing we see a lot of, where it's just like, you read an article written by somebody who wrote an article, like you're like 10 steps removed from the person who actually read the study, right? So it is difficult. And, a lot of times, like, it's not exciting. Like, you kind of look at media and the news, we like doom more than we like, anything that's happy. So it's much better to say that the ketogenic diet causes prostate cancer than it is to say that the ketogenic diet, cures multiple sclerosis, right? Like, people want that kind of doom approach to their media. Not that they want it, but they're attracted to it, I guess I should say. So media outlets give them what they want. So it really is difficult. Like, yeah, I mean, you get just because you go through and you get a study funded, you could get it written up, you could have great results, and it might not even get published. That's the other thing too. I mean, you might bring it to a journal. These journals have review boards that are, that have now been kind of exposed as having, pretty unhealthy bias towards different agendas as well. And this is kind of something that we see it's like the revolving door between like industry and academics, people bouncing back and forth, which creates the opportunities for folks to do that. So it really is difficult. And that's why, just to reiterate, I love what you guys are doing, and what we're trying to do at BioCoach and Verta Health, because it's what, like, I'm not waiting for that. I'm not waiting for you to change the rules so that we can play. We have people to help. We're not getting better. If you look at the health of our society, it's on the decline. Our nation spends the most on healthcare, and we rank like, amongst the lowest in terms of quality of life and hospital care and outcomes when it comes to treating chronic disease. So what's going on is not working. So, putting that time, effort, and money into building something that's real that can help people, I think is a much better use of time and resources.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to eventually get started and do stuff. And if you wait for all the research to be in, or one of the criticisms that I've gotten is, well, we need to understand the mechanisms. And honestly, I don't really care what the mechanism is, because
Right.
I think there's going to be multiple mechanisms, and you're probably never going to solve it all. And I just care about the results. And if we get good results, how it happens or why it's happening. Do I need to understand that to do it? No, I don't think so. I mean, if you
Right.
had to wait for that, no one would really do anything.
And we're not talking about anything crazy here too. I mean, at the appropriate low carb keto diet is a whole food low carb keto diet, right? It's something where you're eating meat, you're eating at meat, eggs, and if you want to have plants like vegetables and low glycemic fruits. Like, in what world would we assume that this is bad for us? So why not give it a try for most of these things, right? I mean, we could all benefit from eating more real food. So it's not like we're trying some crazy out there diet that, I guess some people would say carnivore is a crazy out there diet, but really we're just eating, foods that are produced in their natural form. So I just don't see the reason for us to be so hesitant to assume that that's not going to be as good as a pharmaceutical that we made and patented in the last 10 years that we know nothing about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a realistic way to look at it. Although there's a lot of people think if you don't eat bread, or eat
Right.
rice, then you're crazy and all that stuff. And I get it. I mean, there's people that assume that we're terrified of a vegetable or a fruit, and it's not that. It's just that we've done that, and it doesn't serve us as well as not including that in many cases, and that's why we reached this decision. It's not because we are afraid of it,
You're right.
which I often get, and I think it's kind of silly. But where, because we're running a little bit out of time here, Chris, tell us a little bit more about BioCoach, and tell us a little bit about where people can go to find out your information and that type of stuff.
Yeah. So BioCoach, we are just getting ready to. So we've rebranded over the last couple of years. We were originally just a blood ketone meter, and then 2 years ago we rebranded and received some funding to build out a new health platform. So now we have a new blood glucose and ketone device that reports to an app. And right now our app just went into beta testing, so we're not fully live yet, but we're hoping to go live in the next few months. The app is going to be featuring all kinds of really cool things. We're mostly centered around like teaching people what to eat. So there's going to be some, unique coaching features like challenges that people can jump in. We have a partnership with Walmart where you're going to be able to, get a meal plan and order your groceries right through the app. We'll have recipes and content and all kinds of great things in there. So we're looking for that to launch sometime in June. COVID supply chain constraints have definitely delayed some things for us as it has for most folks. But we're hoping to get that out as a V1 in June and keep progressing from there. So you can check BioCoach out. We're on all the social medias as biocoach.io. Our website is biocoach.io. And then for me, it's the Ketologist on all social media platforms, but Instagram is kind of my primary one. I just do not have the mental fortitude to keep up more than one social media channel, and I haven't hired anybody yet. So Instagram is kind of the main one. I do a little bit on Twitter, so you can find me on there. And then I have a newsletter called Thinking Health, which is a newsletter that it's on Substack, and it's kind of a hybrid between nutrition and philosophy. It's kind of centered around, helping give people different mindsets and mental models for thinking about their health, so they can, make it a little bit easier to adhere to different diet principles. So those are the primary platforms you can find me.
Hey, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. For the rest of you guys, thank you for being here. We'll be back again tomorrow. You guys have a great rest of your day, and take care, everybody. Thanks
All right,
much.
thanks for